Hi there, welcome back. This week we are going to be looking at CSS frameworks, in particular the skeleton CSS framework. So there's more information online about what frameworks, also called boilerplates, what they are and how we use them. But basically they are pre-written code, in this case CSS, that you can install, load onto your web page, and it's like a starting point. It will get you started on a project. Normally, you would then layer your own CSS, your own styles on top of it, but frameworks give you a base structure that you can leverage. You're not writing everything from scratch right from the beginning. We'll be looking at the skeleton framework, which is really, it's a very lightweight one. It's a very simple one. It's more focused on design. There's many more frameworks out there and ones that are more popular and more common, but the skeleton one is a good one just to get started. We'll be building a document that will essentially display all of the or most of the functionality of the skeleton framework that we can then save and keep as a reference document going forwards. So we'll get started here. I've uploaded this zip file skeleton exercise files to eCentennial, and so you can download that, and we'll unzip that, and we'll see in there we have, once it's unzipped, a CSS folder that has two files in it, normalized CSS and skeleton CSS. This is essentially the framework. This is all there is to the skeleton framework. So it's a pre-written CSS document that we'll call in our HTML document. As we later on, when we want to start customizing our pages even further, we will introduce a new CSS document, our own one. We don't make changes to these two documents. These remain untouched. We don't touch them. We just, when we do want to make our changes to the CSS, we'll do that through a third document, our own document. The normalized CSS just sort of removes all default HTML styling, sort of level sets it, everything, and then the skeleton CSS is the actual styling that we will call through our HTML. First thing that I'm going to do before I do anything is rename this folder my name, because eventually at the end this will be zipped and submitted. And at this point, I'm going to open that index. I'll open it in Chrome and see that it's currently an empty document. I'm also going to go and open it in my text editing software. Clear that and see what is actually in this document. It's not much here. It's marked up. This is just sort of been set up for you to get started. It is, a very basic HTML page, which is currently empty. The thing to note here is in the CSS section, once again, it's loading the normalized CSS first, and then it's loading the skeleton CSS second. There's some information that we can put in here. Page title, let's call that, we'll select that, skeleton reference document, and the description, a showcase of the skeleton, let's be more specific, CSS framework. Whatever you want in there, but just sort of describe what the page is, and of course in the author, our own name. Save that, reload again, nothing's here, but I see the skeleton reference document up in my title. And all right. So down in the body section, this is where we're going to be doing our work. So we've loaded the skeleton CSS, and what now as we start adding content to our page, we're just going to see basically what it looks like. And we're going to have to learn, again, like any CSS document, the skeleton CSS uses its own custom classes. So we need to know its dictionary for those custom classes, essentially. The first thing when using this particular framework is the entire page, all the content of the page gets wrapped in a default div with a specific class. And that's just going to add some margins to the side, just add some default styling for all the content. So right at the top, I'm going to open a div, and the class is called container. Again, that is determined. This class container means something because if we open the skeleton CSS, we would find a custom class called container that is setting, specific rules around it. So that is the first thing with this particular framework that we need to do. And I'm going to put a bunch of spaces down here because everything on this page, everything that we're going to be working is wrapped in this div called container. So that's the first thing that's important. Let's just get started looking at some defaults on it. So I'm going to, again, because this is a reference document, I'm going to add a lot of comments in here to mark the various sections. And the first thing that we're going to look at is headings. And let's take a look. H1. This is an H1. And I'm going to save that. We'll take a look. Come back here, reload. And now we're seeing the beginnings of what the skeleton CSS looks like. So already it looks a little different than a standard H1 for sure. I mean, the standard styling would be a serif font. This is sans serif. It's got a margin on the side that's a little responsive. It's getting smaller as it shrinks down. If at any point, and I'll probably do this a lot, you can come back to this page if you want to see, sort of remind yourself, like, what would this look like without the skeleton CSS? So I go back up to my CSS section, and I'm just going to delete that. Save, come back, and there's that. That's interesting. I don't know why it's still serif or sans serif. I wonder if I need to delete and normalize as well. Let's see that. There we go. So this is what an H1 would look like, just default HTML styling. And I'm just going to undo and save. And we can see here how skeleton treats H1. Returning to this, I'm just going to cheat a bit here. I'm going to paste. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. There is 6 heading levels. So I'm going to just change this. Again, by labeling the text itself, when I look at the page in Chrome, it'll be clear to me what it is exactly I'm looking at. So I'm changing the text content as well as the tags. I'm very careful here to make sure everything lines up. So this is an H1 wrapped in H1 tags. This is an H2 wrapped in H2 tags, etc., etc. Save and return. And there it is, a skeleton. Very clean. It's a very nice, clean, simple look. That is how that's the headings in skeleton. Let's look at another aspect of the skeleton framework is how we treat floats. So that can be, often when you're you want to float text left or float it right, it can be, you're normally be in the CSS writing that code. Essentially, it's given us, skeleton gives us pre-written code to do that. So let's open an H2. Class equals, and we want this to float left. So the command to float something left in skeleton is u hyphen pull left. I believe U is for utility. It's just part of the dictionary that the developers created, but that is the class. And then we put some text. So this is a left float. And we can surmise that a right float would be U for utility, pull right. This is a right float. Save that, return this page, and reload. And now you can see they're on the same line. This one's floated in force to the right hand, and this is force to the left. And it's relatively simple. You just need to remember that skeleton specific class, U hyphen pull hyphen left or right. One thing about floats, you might have experienced, and this just goes across all CSS, is you often have to clear them, because if not, they can cause problems with things that follow something that's been floated left or floated right. And I'll just show you right here. I'll just put in an H1 test text. Save that. Normally I now would want to be creating a new line down beneath my two floats. But if I reload that, the HTML has forced it up to run in there, because basically with the floats, it's created a little space in the middle that the HTML sees and immediately wants to force it in there, force the following text in there. So what we need to do is we need to clear our float. And again, Skeleton has something pre-written for that. So after our two floats, I'm going to open a div, and the class equals u again for a utility hyphen cf for clear float. And that's just going to be an empty div, because the CSS that's associated with this class u-cf written in the skeleton CSS is is basically written in a way to remove all the floats. Save, come back, open, and now we see that float has been cleared and our next line of text drops under where we wanted it originally. I'm going to delete that because we don't need that. And that is floats. For, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Next, we'll look at buttons. There's a few things we can do here. So let's just start. Let's just create a button. Put some text in here. This will be a standard button right off the bat. Save, come back, reload, and we can see the default styling that how Skeleton basically treats buttons. The border, the rounded corners, that even the text that's within that button has been styled in a specific way. Again, you can come up here, remove those two CSS, reload, and we can see that would be a standard HTML button. We've also, you can see all of the skeleton styling removed to all the elements that we've done already. Undo and save again. So that's a standard, a basic button. Buttons might be used on forms and that sort of element on your page, but often you want a button to be a link. You want a button to, you might want that button not to be, a submit button. You actually just want it to be a link to, another web page. So we can replicate that look by, so we're going to create an anchor tag, like your standard anchor tag that you'd put, a link to. We're going to apply a class to it though, and the class will be called button. And let's just call it standard web link. So the button element is often used in forms, but if we wanted to use create a link that looked like a button, we apply the button class, which has been determined in the CSS, the skeleton CSS. Save that, reload, and you can see the button there. And this would obviously link to wherever you wanted it to go. It's exact same styling. It's just how you can apply that button styling to anchor tags. Those are, I'm actually going to put in my comments here, I'm going to call that standard buttons. I'm going to throw a break character in there because we can look at what are called primary buttons. Let's replicate this again. We're going to open a button tag, but here we're going to apply a class to it. Class equals button primary. And we'll put some text in there. Button class. So we've opened a button tag, but now we've applied a specific class to that button, again, which has been determined and written in the skeleton CSS. The class is button primary. Then we have the text that will appear on the button, and then we close the button tag. Save and reload, and we can see a different style button. Let's Skeleton calls this a primary button. The same way that we did up here, if we wanted to create an anchor or a web link that looked like a primary button, we open an A tag, we apply a class to it. And what we need to do here specifically, first we need to apply the button class to make it look like a button. And then we put a space, and we're going to stack 2 styles on top of it. Then we apply the button primary class to that. Stack 2 styles on top. First make it a button, then make it a button primary or primary button. And then we'll put some text to appear on that button primary web. Save and reload, and there we go. That would be an input on a form or something similar to that, and this would be, again, a web link. Let's keep looking at buttons. Again, I'm going to put another break in there. So there's one more thing we can do with buttons, and we can look at full width buttons. So we can make our buttons full width of whatever they're in, whatever container they're within. If there's a small div or form or whatever, we can make the button as wide as its container. We can do this to both standard buttons and primary buttons. So let's start at standard buttons. So we open a new tag, it's going to be a button, but this time we're going to add a class. The class is u, again, because this is like a utility dash full dash width. And we'll call this standard full width. Save that, come back and reload, and there is our standard full width button stretching across the entire page in this case because it's filling its container, which in this case is a full. It's also completely responsive, so it's shrinking down as the page shrinks down, and is styled exactly like the previous standard button. The exact same way, again, if we wanted this to be an anchor tag, but we wanted it to look like that, so it would be the class. First, we make that web link look like a button, then we put a space, and now we add the full width CSS on top of that class to make it appear like a standard full width web link. That's the text I'm going to put on that button. Save and reload. And as you can imagine, let's just keep going with this. We want a full width button that has that blue that looks like a primary button. So again, button class equals, like we did up above there, it's button primary. So now it's getting the primary style applied to it, that blue style. And now we had a space and another style on top. utility u-full width. Let's bring primary full width. I'm going to put a lot of text in there. Let's just do primary full width. Save and reload. And there it is there. And one more to keep going. We want a web link to appear primary, like a primary button, and also appear full width. So this is, we're layering these custom classes, just keep layering them on top of each other. So we open an anchor tag, class equals, first we start with button, because first we had to apply the button style to make it look like a button. Then space, we apply the button primary style to make it appear like that blue button. Finally, one more, another space, we apply the full width style. So a lot going on there. This will be primary web full width. Save and return. And that is buttons. Lots of options there. Buttons and web links, I guess, or web links looking like buttons. Let's go on to our next item. And that is lists. So Skeleton will have its own treatment for lists. Same way, like anything, like any list, we're just going to use the default classes here. So we start with, we'll look at unordered lists, so UL for an unordered list. And we just put, let's just put some list items in there. So home, list item, about, list item, contact. Let's save that and take a quick look. You can see you can see sort of how the skeleton treats this. I'm going to put, I don't like working scene right at the bottom. I'm going to add a little div way at the bottom of my page before that closing, this closing div is that container div closing. I'm going to squeeze another in here. Style equals, what should we do? Height, 500 pixels. I'm going to put an empty div that's 500 pixels high. Save and come here. And now I can scroll down a bit and get a better look at my list there. I'm also going to put a couple breaks after my buttons because I don't like seeing that list. It'll give me a little bit of space. So you can just see how Skeleton treats lists, these little circular icons. Again, if we wanted to, we can delete the CSS and sort of refresh our memories of what a standard HTML list looks like versus the skeleton treatment, a little cleaner. We can also add, see how lists, how the sublist, basically we can have sublists. So within the contact item, so I'm going to have to go right behind contact. Before that, before I close that list item, I'm going to open another list. And within that list, do a line item or list item email, list item phone, and list item, how about fax? Why not? I don't know if it's fax anymore, but let's do it. Just going to indent that so it makes a little bit more sense to me. So here we can see I've opened an unordered list. First list item is home, closed. Second list item is about, closed. Third item is list item is contact. Before that gets closed, I open another unordered list. I have 3 entries within that. I close that second, that sub list. And then I have to close that list item, which is contact. And then I have to close the entire list. If I wanted, I could throw one more list item after contact and be called, let's say, services. And then now I've closed my unordered list. So let me save that, return here, and see how the skeleton treats sublists within a list. Let's move on to, let's see, I think we could probably get through 2 more things. Let's throw a break in. So we're going to start a new section. And this section will be code blocks. So code blocks are often use them on web pages where you want, you're basically formatting text to make it look like code. So it looks different from standard text. The first thing that we're going to do open is a PRE tag, which is a pre-formatted tag. Then we're going to open a code tag. And in that code tag, we will write some, we'll make this look like some CSS. Oops. So body, color red, and font family sans serif. And let's leave it like that. Actually, I have all these spaces we don't need here. So the code tags are wrapped in these PRE or pre-formatted tags, and then within that code tags, I've laid some what appears to be CSS. This is actually just the content. This isn't actually CSS, but it's the content of the page. save that, come back here and reload. And you can see how it kind of looks like, it doesn't look like paragraph text. It looks, they've used this certain typeface, and they've also put a background behind it. This is all part of the skeleton CSS to make this look like a code snippet that you might see on a web page when they're, often maybe talking about code. But the pre-formatted, this PRE does, if I remove that and hit save, reload, it's running. Now it's sort of doing what HTML normally does when HTML ignores returns and ignores spaces, and will just and will run whatever text you have here, because it doesn't recognize these returns that I have here. So it just makes this block of text run as a single line, because HTML, generally speaking, it ignores these returns. So what that pre-formatted block does, when I wrap it in that, it's actually saying, like, render this exactly how it appears in the HTML. So it recognizes those returns and respects them and puts them in the final output. It's good that PRE tag is good for code blocks. It's also used a lot if you're displaying poetry on a web page, where the line returns and maybe there's specific indentation that needs to be exact. It's often used in that case as well. And then the code tag itself and the code style is what's adding this background and altering the typeface itself to this more almost like a system font. One last break. And one last thing to look at today, and that is tables. Tables, so can be a lot of typing with tables. So let's just start building one. So open a table tag, it's going to give us our closing one. First thing that we put in the table is a table head. So T head, like working those like that. And let's do in that table head, table row, TR. And then within that, tables often confuse me. To remember, don't do them that often. So then within that table row, we need to put our entries. So that is a TH. We're going to have name. Going to have email. And we're going to have city. Indent. So we have our table and our table head. And within that table head section, we create a row, and then we're putting our entries in that. So let's save that and just take a look and make sure everything is looking all right. So there we go. Name, email, city. So that is the head of our table. Next, we're going to have our table body. I'll clean up all these spaces later. Actually, I can probably get to those now. Table body. That table body is also going to have a row. And that first row is going to have, let's see, we've got name, email, city. So John, misspelled. John, oh my gosh, john@gmail.com. And city, Toronto. So table body. Now for our first table row is has our 3 entries. I'm gonna close that. I'm just gonna copy and paste that 3 times just to make my life a little easier. And I'll go in and just make some changes. So it will Mary at yahoo.com, and Mary is in London. And finally, James at james.com. And I do love Paris. So, and that's our complete table. Let me just double check that. Yes, that should be it. We've opened the table tag, we've opened the table head, put a row in, close that row, we close that head, we've opened the body, we put our first row and its contents in, our second row and its contents in, our third row and its contents in, close the table body, close the table itself. Again, lots going on there. Let's save that and reload and see how that looks. It's a nice little table. It's putting the dividing lines in it and just, you know, applying the specific typeface. Let's see, I just want to refresh my memory again of what does a HTML table look like without any styling, and we can see it there. No dividing lines, kind of clumped together, and of course the sans serif, or sorry, the serif typeface. I think the skeleton version is much nicer looking. I'm going to show you one last thing today regarding tables and regarding sort of skeleton in general. When we're looking at buttons, we looked at the full width utility, how we can make an item full width. We can apply, that's not just for buttons. We can apply that to other elements as well, like tables. So here, I'm going back up into my opening table declaration. Class equals, hopefully remember, because it is a utility class, hyphen full hyphen width. The exact same class that we applied to those full width buttons. I'm now applying it to the table. Save, come back and reload, and there you go. You can see it's full width of its container, which in this case is the page itself, and responsive as well. So just illustrating there how that full width utility class can be applied to many different elements. And I think that's it for now. After there will be a second session on skeleton where we continue to look at what it can do, specifically forms and its grid system. But I think that's enough for today. So let's just quickly review. What did we look at? We looked at how skeleton treats all of its heads, its heading sizes, H1s through to H6, float left, float right, how you can, relatively easily float things by using that utility class, pull left and pull right. How we have to clear that float. So another utility class was the U-CF, just an empty div to clear that float. And then we looked at buttons, both as buttons, true buttons, and also web link or anchor link buttons, both standard and primary, how we can make them full width. Lists and with nested lists, how skeleton styles those, how skeleton treats code snippets, and what the pre-formatted class, how it treats code itself, which is a function of HTML. That PRE tag is not necessarily related to skeleton at all. It's something that will work. It's an HTML class itself, so it's a root HTML class. It's not specific to skeleton. And then finally, lists and how they appear in skeleton and how they can also be made full screen. And that is our first session of skeleton. We will continue on later.